So friends, Montenegro has not yet joined the EU, but the EU lifestyle is already making itself felt in our country, and the influence of Greater Europe is not always beneficial. At the end of 2023, a very large, very controversial, and in my opinion very foolish law was passed here to combat money laundering and the financing of terrorism. Actually, there was a similar law before, but it was, so to speak, of a different kind. It was a reasonable one. But at the end of 2023, we adopted an unreasonable version made under the influence of the EU, and more or less, give or take, this law copies the standards that are in fact practiced in the EU. I have already written many articles about this and made several videos, and now here is yet another video on this topic, hopefully the final one. Let me repeat once again, in my opinion the law is very complicated. I have read it several times. It is indeed lengthy, it is indeed complex, and it is foolish. It is unlikely to have any real impact on those guys who are actually engaged in money laundering, but instead it creates a lot of unnecessary difficulties for those people, for those entrepreneurs who are not involved in money laundering and are simply doing their work. And so for these people who are not involved in anything like that, they've basically come up with a lot of boo, a lot of unnecessary, a lot of additional bureaucracy that we now have to deal with. However, despite the obvious absurdity of such measures, similar laws, as I've already mentioned, and I'll repeat it again, exist in all European countries, or at least in almost all of them, as well as in all countries that are seeking to join the European Union. In particular, this was adopted here, it was adopted in Bosnia, and it was adopted in Albania. Well, that's more or less how it is. There's also some good news. The good news is that for the majority of foreigners living in Montenegro, this law basically doesn't affect them in any way. All that is required of them is to register in the register of the military authorities. We have such a registry here, and I've made many videos about it. You probably already know about it, at least if you watch me regularly. But you do have to update your information there every year. It takes about 10 minutes once a year. I don't think that's any kind of serious problem, although many people complain, argue, and make a fuss about it. But essentially, the whole issue is just spending 10 minutes once a year. This really isn't a problem at all. But there are certain fields that have to meet additional requirements. A bit later, I'll write out a list of activities this applies to, in other words, who's, so to speak, less fortunate. But first we need to talk about the theory. You need to comply with all the provisions of the laws, all this bureaucracy, all these absurdities that have been invented. If your main activity falls under one of the types of activities I'll list below. Accordingly, if your main type of activity is on this list, you need to fulfill all the requirements I'll talk about in this video. If, however, you open the company solely to obtain a residence permit and are not actually conducting any real business, but you see that your activity is also on this list, in my opinion, the simplest, cheapest, and most logical option in this case is just to change your main type of activity and forget about it. We provide services for changing types of activities, including, of course, the main type of activity. Feel free to contact us. We can do this for you on a paid basis. Also, you need to comply with all legal requirements if your main type of activity is not on this list. But in reality, you are engaged in some kind of activity that does fall under this list. Obviously, in this case, this only applies to active companies. For inactive ones, you just need to check your main type of activity. But for active companies, you need to listen further. If your main type of activity is not included in this list, but nevertheless you are engaged in it, which is entirely possible, since your charter may include hundreds of types of activities that are not the main ones, but which you are still entitled to conduct. Accordingly, your main type of activity might be something completely different, something that doesn't affect anything, but nevertheless you are, for example, engaged in residential building construction. This type of activity falls under this law, and therefore you also have to comply with all the bureaucracy it requires. Even, let me emphasize again, even if this type of activity is not your main one, but just a secondary activity, if you are engaged in it, it may be an additional activity, but you are still doing it. Yes, there's another question that often comes up. What if my company charter lists additional activities that fall under this law's list, but I'm not actually engaged in them? In this case, everything is fine. There's no need to rush to comply with all the provisions of the law. If you have this type of activity listed, if it's not your main activity and you're not actually engaged in it, everything is fine. You are not considered an obligated party under this law. By the way, I spent half the day today thinking about how to say obveznik in Russian. If anyone knows a short translation like a single word, please write it. I just couldn't figure out how to express it in Russian with one word. So what kinds of activities are there? Let's move on to the main point, the one you've probably all been waiting for. What types of activities fall under this law? I'll display the codes on the screen now. I won't write out the full names of the activities because that would take too long. I'll write the code, for example, 41.20, and you can check whether it applies to your type of activity or not. I'll explain a bit later how to check this. So the types of activities: 41.20, next 45.11, next 45.19, next 46.14, next 46.48, next 46.72, 46.77, next 47.79, next 64.92, next 68.10, next 68.20, next 68.31, next 68.32, next 69.20. Well, that's that. For those who are lucky, you need to understand all the provisions of the law. Got it. Now let's talk about what you need to do. Yes, to start with, I promised to explain how to match these codes with your type of activity. You have a primary type of activity which is specified in some of your founding documents. In particular, you can find it in the registration decision, in the justification letter, or in the justification agreement. If there is one founder, is the justification letter. If there are two or more, is the justification agreement, and also in the statute, that is in the charter. You should have all these documents on hand. Accordingly, you can open any of them and look up your main type of activity. As for additional types of activity, you can find them in the statute, the charter. That's it. So we've sorted things out for those lucky ones who need to understand all the provisions of the law. Now let's talk about what needs to be done. Let me say right away, don't panic. Although your first instinct is exactly that, to panic, to say, who came up with all this? And most importantly, the second question, why is all this necessary? I don't understand. I am subject to this law. My main activity, my primary business, is 69.2. After that, there are a few additional activities which also more or less fall under it, and I've already attended 3 seminars, each 5 hours long, on this topic, and I've read this law twice. Well, in short, it's a mess. To begin with, what should you do? Well, start with what I did. Read the law, preferably several times. Make notes of all the important elements. If you happen to be subject to this law, you need to know it. It's very large, very complex. It's not about the language, even if you speak Serbian well. It's just inherently complicated. It's long. And after about 10 pages, your brain starts to shut down. So don't expect that someone will do this for you in an easy format with a summary before each section. I don't know, in my opinion, that's just unrealistic. Next, you need to assess the risks related to your activities, your mission, your work, specifically in the area of anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing. This can be done in 2 ways. The first way, which in my opinion is not the most optimal, but which many people will still choose, the first is to buy a program that is required for this purpose, that is to assess risks using a specialized program. I could show you what it looks like, but I think I won't do that. Yes, probably in theory this is in this program you enter all your well, it depends on the type of activity. Somewhere it's operations that you've carried out, somewhere it's just clients. For example, in accounting, you enter clients. Let's say you have I don't know, 200 clients. So you enter those 200 clients, their income, expenses, how you communicate with them, whether in person or remotely, whether they deal with cryptocurrencies, whether you have any suspicions about your relationships and so on. In short, you enter all this nonsense, then press a button and a risk analysis pops up. Some clients will be highlighted in green and some in red. So for those highlighted in red, you need to take a look and figure out why they're marked in red. Maybe you haven't been careful enough in managing risks with these clients. Maybe you somehow help them launder money. So basically it's all just nonsense like that. In theory, you could do all this nonsense without the software. Manually, there are all these coefficients. You could enter everything and calculate it, but that's for masochists. Even in the software, it's not easy to do. Today, my whole office was sitting there, all the employees spending the entire day entering data into this program, and they still didn't finish a damn thing. Yeah, so if you try to do this not in the software but by hand, honestly, I have no idea how many days or even weeks it would take. Yeah, so basically, you really need the software. Can you use the accountant's software? No, you can't, because it's personalized, it's issued specifically, I bought it, and it's for my one company only. Yeah, anyone who wants to buy the same software can purchase it as well. It costs 200 euros again for one company, that is for one license, provided that is not you personally using this software, but your accountant who has completed the required training, which not everyone has finished yet. I've completed it, but not all the way through yet. The third seminar on this topic consists of 3 modules. I've already watched 2 modules, and the third one will be on July 1st. But I'm already recognized as someone who has completed it. Next, you agree with your accountant on the fee for which they will conduct a risk analysis for your company. This work is not related to accounting, it is not considered accounting, so it is not included in the cost of accounting services and is paid for separately. It can be done for an additional fee, an alternative option. Probably the best option for most people is to take the train again, 3 modules, and there are no exams at the end. You just sit, listen, and everything is explained to you. The information won't be completely comprehensive. You'll still have to read the law yourself, ask some questions to the same people who are conducting the training, think things through a bit on your own, and develop some forms independently, which I'll talk about later. But at the very least, you really will be taught how to assess risk analysis. The full training course, including the so-called gift program, will cost you 400 euros. After that, you need to develop and formalize in writing and keep somewhere among your documents several papers, the client identification procedure. Well, for example, let's say you provide some online services and someone calls you via video, Ivanov Ivan Ivanovich, and says, I am Ivanov Ivan. And you say to him, well, I have here an instruction for client identification. So Ivanov Ivan, show me your passport like this, then send me a copy of that passport. Okay, I see that, yes, you really are Ivanov Ivan, so I will continue working with you. Well, I'm simplifying a bit, but basically that's more or less how it goes. That is, you need to develop a document, a procedure for client identification, and an internal policy for combating money laundering and terrorist financing. I'm not joking, I'm absolutely serious about this. You really need to do this, sorry. So the third document you need to prepare is a procedure for assessing the risk of money laundering by clients and suspicious transactions. A procedure for screening PEPs among foreign clients. What is a PEP? I used to know this term, but I forgot it, and today I was sitting and trying to decipher what this thing even means. I figured it out. It's screening people who are politically exposed. Well, now they check them everywhere. If you've gone to a bank to open an account in the past few years, you were definitely given a big questionnaire. Are you politically active? Do you have dealings with the president, the prime minister, or anything like that? Again, I'm exaggerating, but that's more or less what it looks like. Well, you just check no, everywhere. This is pretty much the same thing you need to do here. And again, I always have this question when I go to the bank with a client. If I check yes somewhere, does that mean you can't open an account for them? Now it's the same situation. I have to carry out the PEP verification procedure. Let's say, for example, the person is politically active, maybe some kind of deputy, and wants to open an account in Montenegro. So, am I not allowed to work with them, or what? Or why do I need to do this? Well, at least tell me what the consequences are if you're politically active. Do I just need to establish this fact, or am I not allowed to work with them? And why do I need to do this? I don't understand. Next, the last document that needs to be developed is the procedures for working with clients who use cryptocurrency. It turns out that cryptocurrency is a legal means in Montenegro. By the way, I actually found this out just a couple of days ago when I was at that seminar. I didn't know this before. It's just that when you read the news in Montenegro, it says cryptocurrency is illegal. We want to legalize it, but we haven't done so yet. But at the seminar, by the way, sometimes they actually say useful things there. They say that yes, it is legal, and they explain to us how to account for it on the balance sheets if someone happens to buy it. However, it is still considered an undesirable means of payment because it increases, that is, the risks of tax evasion. And now, in light of this new law, it is formally legitimate and legal, but at the same time you might start getting hassled about why you're using it. Also, you need to sign a contract with every client, not just an invoice, but a contract as well. Keep this contract in your records, have a copy of their passport and a copy of their tax ID. Well, the tax ID is understandable, provided the person is actually from here, meaning if they are a resident of Montenegro, if they have a residence permit here, then they have a tax ID. If they are a foreigner and do not live in the country, they don't have a tax ID, so you don't need to have a tax ID for such a person. So everything is within reason. These documents need to be kept for 10 years. Why is this necessary? Because, for example, there might someday be a request, let's say, from Switzerland saying that you had a Swiss citizen, Ivan Ivanov, who was laundering money. We need the documents that he provided to you 5 years ago. You'll spend half a day in your office looking for these documents, find the contract, passport and application form of this Ivan Ivanov and provide them in response to the request from the Swiss authorities. And by the way, it should be noted that such cases have indeed happened in practice. Very rarely, but sometimes some countries do request information about what their citizens were doing in a particular country, including such requests in Montenegro. Well, besides that, we are now moving on to the concluding part. You are required to undergo training. This is not the training I mentioned earlier, where you are taught how to assess risks. And one more thing. At the moment, this training does not actually exist. It is stipulated by law, but so far no one is conducting it. There is no developed program, no responsible organization assigned to conduct it. In other words, it will exist in the near future. When exactly, I don't know, but right now it doesn't exist. But in the future, when it does appear, you will have to complete this training. Rumor has it that it will consist of about 30 hours. 30 hours is probably a couple of weeks of study. At the end, you'll have to pass an exam and as a reward receive a certificate as an honorary, experienced and well-trained informant. But basically, once again, I'm just calling things by their proper names. And yes, you have to report clients who, in your opinion, are behaving strangely or who, again, in your opinion, are conducting suspicious transactions. If you think they might be laundering money, you need to turn them into the appropriate authority. And I have just one question. Do our lawmakers really believe that someone will actually report their own client? In my opinion, you might as well just shut down your business right away and go work at a factory. Ah, yes, apparently that's exactly what they think, because not only have they made it mandatory for you to report your clients, a special portal has been created where you can file these reports. And to access this portal, you have to buy a digital signature certificate. There will be some kind of special certificate. In fact, it's not that there will be, it already exists, because the portal is already up and running. I also have to buy this certificate. Of course, it's clear that I'll never have clients with a lot of money, but I have to have the certificate. That's it. And if you don't have it, you can also be fined. So I'm literally going to order it tomorrow. Everything I've just listed, everything I've talked about here is seriously. It's not a joke. It's not some kind of April Fool's prank or trick. All this nonsense, all of these things really and truly has to be done. No exceptions, no kidding. There are very large fines for non-compliance. Friends, to put it briefly, welcome to the EU. Did you want to join the EU? Well, maybe not all of you, but many of you did. Well, here it is, the EU in all its glory. I've just described everything in a simplified way. I've left out some nuances that don't apply to everyone. That's why I want to emphasize once again that you should at the very least read the law yourself and ideally also attend a couple of seminars. I've already attended 3 seminars on this law, and I'm not sure that's the end of it, because things are periodically changed, or there are certain points that aren't very clear and can be interpreted in different ways. And so whenever a correct interpretation appears, they announce a new seminar, and all the initiated, that is, accountants who have completed the training and have a certificate of being initiated into the mysteries of payroll are invited to the next seminar, where they say, we're going to discuss this particular point. If you want to attend, it costs such and such amount. Thank you all for your attention. You can contact me with questions about immigration to Montenegro, about life in the country, about obtaining a residence permit, or about accounting services. Goodbye, everyone.